Ready? Call the Planning Board and Zoning Commission meeting for August 26, 2026 to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Roberts, Gray, Tupin.
Here.
Ecclesville, Boise.
Here.
Conley.
Here.
And DiBenedetto.
Here. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes for August 12th, 2026?
I move to approve the minutes of August 12th, 2026 with some amendments.
Okay.
I'll second. The thing that I was looking at was on page 2, 8, under written correspondence, and that was Fadness. And it was all about the landmark building. It reads, the proposed building is near Oaks Avenue, adjacent to the old Quonset hut area and near the skate park. And actually, it's on Oaks Avenue, and it's where the old Quonset hut was.
But what did he say?
Adjacent to the Quonset hut.
Because that's reporting what was said.
So you think that's exactly what was said?
Usually I go through the video when I review my minutes.
I'm just saying, this isn't for editing, it's just for accuracy.
Yeah, well, this is inaccurate, really, because it's on Oaks. And I think that the discussion at that point was whether it was on Hauser or whatever, and I had said, I reached out and said, no, it's Oaks. But it's where the old Quonset hut was, not adjacent to it, since it doesn't exist anymore. It be gone. That was the only thing that I had a question on.
Okay. Make those changes, Connor?
Yes.
All right. Can I have roll call to approve the minutes as amended?
Tupin.
Yes.
Boise.
Yes.
Conley.
Yes.
And DiBenedetto.
Yes. Communications from the board and council. Yes, I'll report out on the urban renewal meeting last Monday. We had a brief discussion about use of TIF funds and the idea behind TIF funds is to invest in properties that will increase in value and thus return those increased value into the TIF or TIF accounts. That was just kind of a brief discussion amongst the board. The final report for that housing assessment report was discussed, and there'll be a meeting October 27th with the planning board and city council at 6 p.m. to kind of go over the findings of that of the housing assessment report. Let's see. And the other thing we talked about was the item that we're going to discuss tonight in terms of place-based zoning, and kind of had a discussion about that, in terms of if that is kind of the direction we're going, then the idea is to sort of start the process in place to look for planning assistance in order to develop the master plan for the urban renewal area and some guidance relative to that. Also brought up that a lot of our discussions have been kind of focused on the 212 corridor, but the urban renewal area actually encompasses pieces of R4, R2, C2 and, R3. So that just to kind of keep everybody kind of in mind that it's not just the C3 North area. It's kind of encompasses pieces of those other zones as well. So if we were to do a master plan, it would be logical to reincorporate the entire URA and not just focus on the 212 corridor. And that's kind of the gist of what was discussed. LCD, do you have anything to report from the city?
What do you guys want to hear? In terms of the cities, I think the most pertinent thing to planning board was the appeal. That did get denied. So we are sticking with the 5-foot sign. There was question at the end of the meeting in public comments of if that was handled legally. So we're having Jeremy take a look. Apparently, because it was quasi-judicial, he was asking for reasoning, legal reasoning for why he was denied. So we might have to go and just create like a more official motion.
I was kind of curious why the applicant wasn't there, since he is not the applicant.
I think it's because he's the one that is the stakeholder versus.
But he's not the
owner.
applicant.
I think she has to be on the application, even though he is the one putting in the sign. I think we've been through that a few times.
Well, I'm just saying that last night he was being referred to as the applicant, and he was not the applicant. He might have been appointed by the applicant to speak on his behalf, but that was not made clear.
I'll defer to Jeremy on that one.
Well,
I mean, the applicant doesn't have to be at the meeting. They just have to be at the meeting, or a representative has to be at the meeting. So that's what happened last night. So the applicant's not required to be at the meeting.
no, they were just referred to as the applicant, and I thought we should have made it clear that he was speaking on behalf of the applicant.
I'll take that if there's language. I viewed the designee as one and the same as the applicant, but I'll take that if you want to throw that out. That'll be me who referred to him as the applicant, so I'll own that.
Otherwise, there was multiple other things brought up at council last night. Encourage everyone to watch that meeting, two of which were here for that meeting. I'm assuming Sue got an earful about that meeting just because you're pretty involved. You guys were there. The other piece that I would say that is pertinent to planning board would be the interlocal agreement, just because there is a boundary map of what the city has approved through ordinance, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. 3 years ago. So that it does create that boundary, which is different than what the county has presented. So I think that's, it's tighter than what the county presented. There's 2 different maps. County had a much larger scope. The city's map is a little bit more specific to the airport. So those would just be the things that I would take in mind. That would really take the biggest precedent here. And
was the interlocal voted on last night? Or
it was.
And?
It passed.
Good.
So that's going through to the county to review and either approve, deny, or counter. So we'll see what happens there. Otherwise, the other pieces is the tennis courts have put together an application for the use over at coal miners. We've gotten a staff, oh my gosh, so sorry. We have a staff report from from Jeremy. That's fantastic, and thank you for that, Jeremy. We didn't get to discuss it very much, but there will be public hearing at the next city council meeting where we do plan to take action, whether we will approve or deny the tennis courts and likely with conditions.
Clarify that would be October.
Yeah, let me clarify. The public hearing won't be till October 13th, council meeting.
My bad. Right. Thank you.
I was curious whether there was some sort of, visual on the tennis courts?
There are. So that's within the application, and I might try and get that included in the packet, because we have a staff report as well as a very thorough application. I think those two things combined is very beneficial. And then there will also be an MOU that's presented as well.
Of course.
Was the application in the previous packet, do you recall?
I believe it is, yeah.
So I think it's out there, it's just the application was one packet, then the staff report was the next packet after
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I just looked at last night's packet and was looking for some sort of
Yeah.
visual,
Yeah, there's a very thorough engineering report with visuals.
I assume.
All of those pieces, yeah. So they did a PAR essentially, and
Oh.
it's very detailed. They've done their due diligence, to say the least. So yeah, that'll be a very, it's kind of early stages of this planning and procedures, for deciding what goes on city use land, or city land, but it's a good test run, and I think that, so far, pretty impressed with the process and happy with how it's looking. I think we still have a few things to tweak, but getting there.
On the airport boundary, I thought that the boundary that was agreed to by the city a couple years ago was based on a land survey and was recorded. Is that,
Don't believe that actually was surveyed or recorded. I think that was supposed to be done at the time of the passing of the interlocal.
It was surveyed.
It was surveyed.
It was surveyed. No?
That's
It
what I
was
was under the
proposed as
impression of.
surveyed.
There was an ordinance that is the boundary that will have surveyed, and basically it's tied to kind of the interlocal, why spend the money until everybody agrees on it and it's
Yeah.
done.
So that's,
So it was put on hold until the interlocal.
yeah. So, but the boundary map has been drawn, and that is in the packet if you guys want to review it. There's actually both of the different boundary maps. So you can see those referred and be voted for the one that was approved by ordinance.
And the other one is the original
I don't know.
boundary map.
I'm not sure if
No,
I call
it's
it
not
the
even.
original. It's just one created by the county.
Okay.
Again, who knows what the original is? We're just gonna move forward with the one that we
I don't think
want.
there was one.
Yeah,
Well, there is an original that was done by survey in either the 50s or the 70s, but it's really, and if you look at the city map, it actually starts out with an outline of what was surveyed and done back then. But it is so big, so huge, and encompasses way more than needs to be. Council approved a map that basically tightened it in. County proposed with one that the differences are not significant at all, probably less than 2 acres in it, but their version was that it follows the road and it includes the little corner where the carnival had been placed. And in exchange, it was also a straight line on the west fence. So the answer is it might even be a little bit smaller with the county's version, but there were 2 chunks of land within it that were different. However, council had passed an ordinance on the other one, and so it was felt that was the appropriate one to use. So what was voted on by Bridger, and what we got from which is basically the county kind of was coordinating the edits, was their role in it, included a map that the commissioners had thrown in, and council's feeling was that they wanted to go with the one that was previously approved by council. So that's what we did.
And has Bridger already approved the interlocal?
Bridger has already approved it.
So now it's to the county supervisors. Okay.
It is to the county commissioners.
Yeah.
so yeah, it was a big night last night. Yeah, anything else, any questions?
no, I don't have
Okay.
anything else.
I mean, there's other things, but I'll try and keep it concise to what's pertinent, so.
Okay. Communication from the mayor.
I will just add a little follow-up on the sign appeal. So I did reach out to Jeremy first thing this morning. We were talking before 8 actually, on the question that Chelsea alluded to was there needed to be a legal reason stated for why it was denied. In chatting with Jeremy, he indicated no. He actually has me a draft appeal, which Jeremy, by the way, looks great. And I'll just summarize. This is the record of decision. Council discussion from majority of council members was that the council generally supported the planning board's design review. That should have an apostrophe of the sign, and felt that the zoning regulations through the design review process allowed the planning board to request or condition modifications to a proposal based on its review of historic character in the downtown. The planning board has done this on previous design review applications and felt this was in line with the planning board's duties during design review. So I thought I would share that with you because my takeaway from that, and I felt going into that it was going to be a discussion of does council support planning board in the review, or did they think that planning board had overstepped their bounds and needed to have the leash snapped a little bit? And the feeling I got last night, while there are concerns of, we want to make sure opinions don't come into it, that it's there. What I heard in that meeting was overwhelmingly, this sure sounds like they had a good discussion. They had a negotiation and came up with a compromise, and we back and support that. And 3 of you were there. Is that a fair? Actually, the only person who wasn't there was Sue and you. I think everybody else was there, but that was certainly my take on it and what I thought. Oh, Joanne wasn't there. So I wanted to share that to you as a board because I know you guys put an awful lot of volunteer hours into this too, and I thought it's important that you hear that.
I think the only thing I would add is I think the only reason that the council would have needed to provide justification for their decision was if they went against what the planning board's decision was. So they would have had to make a finding, a different finding than the planning board made, if they were going to choose to approve the appeal and go with a larger sign. Okay. But since they did not do that, since they upheld the planning board's decision, it's in the record why, based on the discussion, there was no change to the findings. So there doesn't need to be that change, right? The council upheld the planning board's decision and therefore the staff report.
Jeremy, if you could summarize that in a paragraph and send that over to the applicant when you send it over, I think that would be helpful.
Sure.
Or the app.
I did not read that in the decision of review, and I don't know that it needs to be, but that paragraph that you just gave, I think, is the explanation paragraph that, in fairness, he was asking for, and I was not qualified to answer, so I didn't even attempt to.
Yeah, when we say, I don't think that needs to be in the record of decision. I think that what we have in the record of decision is accurate, and then I can just follow that up when I send the record of decision out.
Yeah, I understand there was a question about, here is why I don't think that was necessary. Here's the circumstance where it would have been necessary. I think it was sheer perfection. Thank you. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, I don't think I have anything to add from the executive branch. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm able to answer questions if there are any, but otherwise I'm good.
Well, I was just gonna, I guess, ask a question on the decision notice, whether it be appropriate to cite 4.6.82 historically appropriate sign design, where it talks about signs shall be placed in appropriate sign areas as defined by existing architecture and building facade, and signage shall be appropriately scaled to the facade. Those are two clauses within our zoning regulation relative to historic signage. I'm just throwing that out if that would strengthen the...
Well, and I think that goes into the original record of decision that you guys did, and you did have to cite reasons and the specific things that were listed there. This one is just saying we're upholding your decision.
Okay.
Yeah, all that, Jeff, all of that is in the record, right? So you guys had that in your discussion when you made your decision. That was even brought up last night during public comment, and I think during city council discussion. So all of that is in the public record. So I don't think we need to state it specifically.
And I would go back further and say, since that would be the previous record of decision where that would be appropriately put, going back and modifying it at this point, I would say would be problematic. Let's not go there.
Okay. Yeah, and I did mention it last night in my public comment, cited both those. I just didn't cite the reference to the specific sections, but, okay. Guess that, and we'll move on to, our first public comment, before we go to new business. And then, we'll also have a public comment at the end of the meeting if you wish to make comments about anything that was discussed during our meeting. So I'll open it up to public comment.
Steve Smith, 517 North Hauser. I'm on the subject of the sign and the appeal and the denial of the appeal. I was concerned when that happened last evening, and I'm very glad that the mayor took some immediate action. I was a little concerned that the action wouldn't be as immediate as it was, but that was great, because I saw if that process, questioning the appeal process, had continued, it would have kind of negated the whole reason for having an appeal process for the planning board in the first place. So thank you for doing that. I think it resolved quickly. And one quick aside, the applicant or the designee did make the statement that the only reason he agreed to the appeal, or to the decision to go from 7 to 5, was so that he could appeal. Anyway, thank you.
Any other public comments from the room? Anybody online?
Andy?
I do not see any raised hands, unmuted mics, or cameras turned on online. For the record, we do have Angela Getchell, Judy, and then the others that I see online are actually online presences of those in this room.
If you're gonna read who's online, then you should also
That's what I just did.
read who's in the room.
Oh, in the room, I see Joanne Eder,
Oh.
Steve Smith, and Hope Smith.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a question if we were, and the basis of the concern last night was that the people at the table couldn't read the names, and or all the names were not represented. So that's specifically why I did that. And I still have some concerns because that lists names and changes on, but I just figured I'd eliminate all the drama for the night by just taking care of that up front. You can see it worked really, really well.
Yeah.
All right. We have some new business on the agenda tonight, and that's review the recommendations from the Urban Renewal Agency on new urban renewal overlay zoning district. That would include a form-based code. And that information was given out at the last meeting, as well as it was included in our packet. And I guess maybe first I'll open it up and have Joanne, if you want to step forward and kind of review what the URA is proposing, and then we'll have discussion or questions.
Well, I wanted to ask if everyone got Jeremy's discussion on that issue. Was that included then in your final packet?
It was included in what Connor sent out, yes.
Okay, good. Sorry for my notes on there, but that's all I had. So, well, basically, we heard about this form-based zoning when the Kansas State people were here. And they said it had been used in other communities in their urban renewal districts. And then it was more flexible than the standard zoning. What do you call it?
Zoning.
the standard zoning. And then it helped
Euclidean
to,
zoning is what you're.
Euclidean, exactly. I should have remembered
Am I
that, right?
Reading view, I think that's where you're looking
Yes,
for.
that's right, exactly. So, we asked for some references and we looked into it, and we thought it sounded really interesting because of all the concept reviews we'd done and all the ideas that KSU had presented as possibilities for different areas, and they looked wonderful. We thought it would be marvelous. And so we thought it would be a useful way to go. So we asked Jeremy or the mayor asked Jeremy to do a study on it, and he did we thought it was a really thoughtful and careful study, and presented it to us in a special working group. And so you have copies of that. So then we went back and looked at all the formation documents for the Urban Renewal District. We looked at the results of all the community meetings that we had about what people envisioned the Urban Renewal District could look like. And we also looked at the growth plan, the city growth plan, the most recent one. And it seemed that this type of form-based overlay would be consistent with all the goals and objectives that were mentioned in all those different areas. So that's outlined in the resolution. And it's specifically outlined in Jeremy's report. He offered several options, and we thought the most reasonable one, and the one that would be the most efficient and effective to carry out, was to allow you all to go ahead and do the zoning that you're doing, which is almost done and is very thorough and very complete. And then, because developing this form-based overlay would take time, and it takes more community meetings, and there's a whole process to go through to envision exactly what specific things you wanted to include in the form-based. And Jeremy also suggested that there might be funding to do a study on this and hire an expert on the form-based overlay that could come in and help us work through that, because it would take, he estimated, about a year to accomplish that. In the meantime, whatever zoning you come up with would be the effective zoning for that. So if we had an opportunity that came up that we thought would be consistent with what we wanted it to look like, we could go ahead with the existing zoning. And so it wouldn't slow things up at all. It's just that for the final product going forward, we would have this overlay. This has been tried in it's been tried in East Helena. Billings has a district that has it. Missoula has had one for quite a while. And so there's a precedence for this in historic districts or urban renewal districts. So that's the basis for our request. So we request that you would recommend this, and it's up to the city council, I guess, in the long run. So that's basically our request. Is there any questions?
The thing that I keep going back to is we've done different overlays, and within that overlay there are more strict codes.
There can be.
Well, I'm just saying in what we've done in the past.
I think, were they form-based?
No, and that's why I'm trying to decide what the difference is between a form-based overlay versus an overlay.
I think Jeremy,
I read through this and it still doesn't make any difference.
well, maybe Jeremy can elaborate.
Yeah, so form-based code is just a different way of looking at the space, okay? So right now, your zoning regulations are what we call Euclidean zoning. It's the standard zoning that's been in, the United States and, for 150 years, right? And it outlines permitted uses, it outlines, setback requirements, height limitations, those sorts of things. Form-based code essentially gets rid of a lot of that that the use restrictions, and it looks at building design more and site design more than it looks at the use. So form-based code does not technically. I mean, you can do a hybrid form-based code where you have permitted uses and then, the form-based portion. But it really, what comes out of it, and I can provide examples of like Billings form-based code, but what comes out of it is essentially you get diagrams of how lots are to be developed within that district. So that's going to be, if you're in the downtown, for instance, it's going to be, buildings that are, up against the front property line. You're going to have elevation views of what what you want that to see in that district. So a lot of, essentially, if you think about it, it's a lot of what Kansas State University did with their study, right? Where they kind of showed those building types that and went through that public process. So it's just a different way to look at zoning, other than what you currently have. But it does allow flexibility for uses. So where it's handy is that rather than being very explicitly, this is permitted, this is not, this is a conditional use permit, it's more of, this is what we want the building to look like, this is what we want the site to look like, right? These are the things we want to see. We don't care so much about the use. That way you're more geared towards mixed use development in that case. So you have commercial, and you can't, not to say you can't outline uses. I'm just saying that's what it's intended for, right? Hopefully that
One
helps.
point you made, Jeremy, which I thought was very powerful, was that it would be more efficient, it would be a lot easier to administer, and it would be a lot easier to work with developers on, because it would be clear what the intent was. So you did say in the long run it would be easier to use for development.
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically provides a blueprint for what the city wants to see, right? So they know what to expect when they purchase a piece of property and they want to develop it. The form-based code shows these are the types of things that you need to do on these lots for the city to approve it. Rather than now, it's, we go through this conditional use permit process or the design review process and these other things. It doesn't allow for developers necessarily to have a warm, fuzzy feeling, if you will, that their project is going to be approved. So form-based code kind of helps by putting what you want in the code so that a developer sees that and says, okay, as long as I do it this way, my project is good to go.
Isn't that very restrictive? It kind of sounds like each parcel of land, you're going to have a layout on the way you want that land to be, whether the building is here and green space there type of thing. So it's going to be much more restrictive.
No, we don't get into parcel. We're not going to say that you have to do this on each parcel. We're going to say, generally speaking, that in this district, for instance, we want buildings that are up against the highway, right? You're going to be general site design requirements, like the building front's going to be up against the highway or X number of feet off the highway right away, where parking is going to be behind the building, not in front or on the side, right? We're going to talk in general terms about building massing, right? Height requirements, things like that. We're not going to say you have to do this on this parcel and you have to do this on this parcel. It's more of generally, this is what we want. And again, I can send an example from the Billings form-based code, so you can see and that's essentially what they did in their downtown, is they just have an overlay in their downtown with the form-based code on the district that they have. previously. But it, like I said, it did take them a while to develop that. I want to say I mean, they're obviously a lot bigger city, but it took them a year or two to get that form-based code developed and implemented.
I'm just trying to decide the difference between what we've already got, which calls out all of those things. Where the building is, where the parking is, all of that is currently in our zoning. So I'm trying to decide why our zoning is different from form-based zoning, and that's what I'm not understanding. Maybe I'm a little dense here.
I mean, what I can I think the big piece with this, as opposed to having it in R3, R4, C3 North, this would then encompass all of
An overlay.
the URA. So that consistency in terms of design, though it might not be consistent with all of R3, it's consistent within that section, if that makes sense.
So within that section, the R3 zoning may be different than the underlying zoning.
Right.
Is that right? Is that where we're going?
Correct. Let me see if I can pull up the City of Billings code and kind of show you what their form-based code looks like. But I can also I can also send it you know, as we talked about, we're in the middle of zoning right now, and so this is a process that's going to take time. So, I mean, if you wanted to keep this on your old business agenda for a few meetings, I can print out some examples and provide that to you for the next meeting, so you can have a chance to kind of look a couple examples over. If
that would be great.
If that would be helpful.
Because I'm just not getting the difference between form-based versus zoning that we've already got, so.
I mean, to me, it sounds kind of perfect for everything that we've been discussed, where instead of creating, you know, well, let's have another review, let's have these conditions, you're creating conditions based off sections versus creating conditions based off entire zones. I think that it's honestly really works with what we've discussed, and it also, again, eliminates the question of who, again, and I say it all the time, but like, who cares what you're doing between the walls? It eliminates that part of the problem of like, well, I want this here and the use, where instead it's like, we want it to look like X. And what you do within those spaces, as long as you're following those general parameters, like, is appropriate. And so, again, it eliminates a lot of the process that a developer would have to go through to actually make progress.
Would it eliminate the conditional use? That's for you, Jeremy.
Depending on how we set it up, right? So if we set it up with enough specifics where you guys are comfortable that if a developer comes in and builds to this requirement, then yes, I think it could replace conditional use permits. Because if they do it this way, then they're doing it to the way you want it to be done. So there would be no point to a conditional use permit. So, but if they wanted to propose something different, right, than what you have in your form-based code, then that would maybe be a planned unit development type situation, or maybe it's a conditional use if they propose to do something different, where it would come to the planning board and go through that public hearing process.
Okay. I look forward to seeing the examples.
Sue, do you have any thoughts?
It's a thought, but it's not necessarily right now. But since we're looking at the area that we're looking at, where we're getting close to the city entrance and all, and since we have a highway out there, it might be that we wanted to, as an early step, check with the highway department about, reinforce what the distances would have to be and what the parameters were that we would have to consider when we're doing all this other, rather than doing it backwards and then discover, oh, they won't let us do it like that.
That's the goal. Yep.
So,
you have any comments, Chelsea? Questions?
I think, again, I like the concept, and I am all for setting clear criteria with clear expectations. I preach that constantly, so this fits right in line.
Yeah, I've been kind of intrigued by the concept for a long time since I first heard about it. So I'm definitely thinking it's something worth pursuing and studying a little bit more, getting a little bit more familiar with it. And I think having some examples from other form-based codes from other communities to look at would also be helpful. Has anybody had a chance to look at Jeremy's report?
Yeah.
Very briefly, unfortunately. It's a
And
heavy packet week.
Anyway, in the back of that, he's got this discussion questions for the planning board and URA, and those are probably well worth taking our time to kind of go through those and review those at some point. And then also, as Joanne iterated, he laid out some recommended approaches. The main one being that we continue on the process of getting our zoning updated, and then while that's going on, there theoretically, if there's funding through grants or other means, an agreement from this board and from council, I guess, to pursue this, then would try to get, I guess, what I'm hearing from you, Joanne, is at that point there would be an effort to go out and solicit the development of a master plan that would kind of lay out what the form-based code would look like. Is that?
Yeah, with a consultant who knows how to do this and really understands form-based codes and the whole process of developing them. So, I mean, it's up to us to decide what we want. I mean, that's flexibility. It's not telling us what we have to do. It's allowing us to envision what we'd like it to look like. So.
It's a different way to document the visioning.
It's more so.
What'd you say, Dave?
So it's a different way of documenting the visioning so developers have something to go off of.
Right.
I was gonna say, I feel like it's gonna be pretty, not just liberating, but cohesive. That, I think, is the nice thing about it, is, again, instead of things potentially changing or, again, things becoming subjective, you're getting a large group of people putting together that vision and just implementing those plans as they come forward versus, and again, just eliminating a lot of process that doesn't need to be there.
Well, one of the things that we've discussed is having variable setbacks, and it seems like having an overlay that kind of spells out in a little bit more detail what that would mean in terms and how that would move forward in achieving the vision and goals for that area. That's just kind of one example. Rather than us kind of sitting here at the table kind of trying to visualize what that means and articulate that. So that, that's, to me, that's just one example. In terms of time frame and our next, how to move forward, I'm assuming that we would have to make, if the planning board agrees to go down this line, we would need to form a recommendation to take to the city council and then have them either approve or deny the process. Is that kind of the way the process is would move forward, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that the council, Yes, I think that in general, planning board would make a recommendation to the council to consider directing the city staff to work towards development of an overlay district and form-based code for the URD. And in that, the city council could essentially direct staff and planning board to, get grants or, that sort of thing to work towards that goal. And then, I mean, that would at least kickstart the process and council could kind of direct that. I think there's a couple different ways that, Kansas State University may be able to help with development of form-based code. I don't know how far they go into doing that kind of stuff. But that might be a starting point. We can always go after CDBG planning grant funds to develop, to do that process, which is a 75-25 match. So we could develop a budget and get a planning grant for that. And then the city could put out an RFQ for a planning consultant to do that. The other option is if the city wants to just do it, is just direct WWC to start that process and do it with the planning boards, with the planning board. That'd be the other way to do it if you didn't want to wait for funding. Because funding cycles, right? If you go through CDBG, we're probably looking at a year before we're going to get any funding for something like this before we could even start. By the time you get funding, get the contract in place, get the RFQ out, get a consultant selected, you're probably looking at this time next year before you even start that process. So I think there's just different ways to go about it. And I think that's ultimately up to the council on how they want to proceed with that, right?
Joanne, does the Urban Renewal Agency discuss the timeline in terms of this planning board making a recommendation to city council? Or
Well, the sooner the better, since it is a long process, yeah. Especially if, as Jeremy said, if there are different options for proceeding, I think that the sooner the better would be good. Because there are opportunities coming up all the time to implement some of these concepts that we have. And so the sooner that we can proceed along these lines, I think that the sooner we can be showing results.
So I'm kind of sensing that we'd like to have more information in terms of what form-based code kind of looks like. Is that?
Where I'm going is we already have zoning in that area, okay? This sounds like a minimum 2-year process, a lot of money outgo to end up with what we've already got. That's why I really want to see, I've got to see the difference between form-based and regular zoning, and I'm not sure that it justifies it, frankly. And I'm worried that it's going to be more restrictive than zoning. I mean, so that those parcels within the URA, it's already decided on how they're going to be used, and I'm not sure I want to do that in advance. But like, again, I want to see what form-based differs. I have to see that difference.
Kind of along that line and along the line of the highway. There's also geographic stuff, particularly where water level and all is concerned. In the area that we're thinking about, because you have the highway and then you go up a little on one side and you're flat on the other side. But some of that area is steeper than other parts. Some of it doesn't have water issues underneath. But we don't know what they are. And it's entirely possible, I mean, I know where some of them are, but it's entirely possible that somebody has done a study on this at some time over the past 5 or 10 years, at least a basic study of where we know the artesian wells are going to be. And we have at least one retired person in town who has done that kind of thing in the past, but I don't know if he's done it specifically for the area we're looking at. But that could be something we could explore that could, in the long run, save us time, because there's certain things that can go certain places easily where it doesn't matter whether there's water that's going to flood out by itself, or there some of the land uses could work in quite well with or without it. You know, it can make a difference between what needs to be put on there before you invest all of your time and money in building design. You know, if you know that, you don't want to find out after the fact that, oh, that's not going to work. So that might be something we could consider when we're putting together the backdrop before we get too involved in what we really, really want, and then a year after the fact we discover that's just not going to work because of the land.
So are you referencing the springs that are popping out along the hillside?
That's one of it, yeah. I know when we when we moved here and we were looking, we were told that whatever you do, you don't want to buy land on that hill. And of course, at the end of Grant, within the past year or two, there was a gentleman whose house started to wash away because all this stuff came up from underneath. Yeah. Not only did he have the water issue, but he also had, there was an old mine underneath. So, you know, you want to know about that stuff ahead of time.
I'm very familiar with that one.
And up until now, when somebody comes in front of us with a design review, they do that work. So I'm not sure that we're the ones that should spend the money on that kind of a research when the developer is the one who needs to look at the land and decide whether or not it's appropriate and for their uses. So, and we all know that whole bench is problematic. Mm-hmm. And I think that we actually have a section in our staff reports that refers to that specifically, because the person who's the applicant has already done their due diligence. So I'm not sure that we need to do that.
Well, that's the part I'm getting at. Where it's already been done, I think it would be helpful to us to have that documentation, because if it's already been done, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can ask who has used it in the past, and, you know, if they've already built their whatever, they can fill in some of the blanks. And then you wouldn't have somebody completely write out, oh, I want to have DUD or something here, and I want here, and here. And, oh, well, that sounds great. And not know until the last minute, after you spent a year or two coming back and forth to us, that, no, that's just not going to work. Also, we need to keep in mind, if we know at this point what our 4 or 5, well, maybe 5 or 10 types of growth we would want there. What do we want? Housing? What kind of housing do we want? Do we want stuff that would help the schools? Do we want the landscaping to make it look prettier coming into town? It would be great if we could at least get a basic idea of where we're going, and then a basic idea of what's possible and what isn't, before you start having all of your house plans and parks plans put together. In other words, see if it's probably possible before you invest all of your time and some of your money into it.
Can I just say that I think speaks very much in favor of doing this? Because realistically, what Joanne is presenting and what the process sounds like, the reason it's a 2-year process is
Yeah.
you're doing that due diligence. And frankly, I feel like that would be extremely beneficial to anybody who's considering to develop in that area. If we can identify issues at the gate and create that form-based zoning and make that more efficient, and in the process, hopefully using grant funding to do so, or even more specifically, TIF funding that's been set aside. And then when you're talking about what are those uses and what we should use, we literally have a board who's trying to do that and identify it. So if we're going through a process and they are going through a very detailed study to identify that, I can only see how that's beneficial, as opposed to us coming up with things that are completely outside of what they're taking into consideration. Because if that's the case, why are they there? So I think that this very much is, and again, I think that there's a lot of those resources that already exist, but instead of us trying to seek it and find it and then saying yay or nay, that can be a part of that study. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something we pay out of pocket. I think it speaks in favor of potentially getting a grant or using some of those URA funds for a match. Because, you know, it's not like we have a lot of URA funds, but it might be that that's what makes sense versus like we're going to pay for one guy's parking lot. To me, I'd rather see a cohesive plan, and based off a lot of the urban renewal district meetings and the master plans and the growth policy, that's been a lot of the discussion, is trying to find a cohesive plan that can coordinate this moving forward, because everyone's got the vision. It's this part in the middle where the struggle's always been and some of the big concerns that came up in those meetings. So to me, this seems like it's right on course with the mission and the goal. And again, I'm all for seeing what form-based looks like, but at the very least, having that kind of study could be wildly beneficial, not just for the cause of the urban renewal district and its vision and the purpose, but also for our constituency, for the people within town. And, I mean, think about it as a realtor, Sandy, where it's like, this is a report on this land. It's super valuable because you can do a really cool pond here, or you can't because actually pond permits aren't allowed within the basin anymore.
Because you're gonna have one anyway. You're gonna have one.
But again, it's like, that's something that frankly, I feel like that should be a priority of the planning board, is public health and safety and the welfare of the people within our city. And that includes development. Anyway, that's my thought. Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, I think that's where I struggle, is we have a vision, goals and objectives, but we don't have a mechanism that will guide us to achieve those. We have traditional zoning, but that doesn't necessarily, at times can be restrictive. Doesn't allow for a design that really fits with the parcel and the vision of more green space, like we've talked about, extending the setbacks and landscaping and those kinds of things. So, but if you do it piecemeal, it really doesn't lend itself to achieving what we want to see in the long term. So I guess I do want to see more examples as well, and how that might look in look at what other communities have done, and how that might those ideas and concepts might fit within the URA. And again, I kind of remind everybody the URA is bigger than the 212 corridor. And it may be that this is a process that will help sort of coordinate that within that area without dealing with a bunch of rezoning or that we might have to look at. One other question, I guess, kind of going back to what Sue was alluding to, was sort of a description of environmental constraints or things that might limit some of the opportunities? Are those usually contained well, I would assume they could be contained within the kind of the URD master plan that would set the stage for developing form-based code.
Yeah, I mean, if there's identified areas that you don't want to see something, then I think maybe that just isn't part of the overlay too, right? So I think identifying those areas that are sensitive to development, that we maybe don't want to see some of the things we're talking about, would need to be identified as part of that initial development, right? Which would be the master planning or in public involvement, right? And where you're going to set the boundaries for that overlay, and then the regulations that go along with that overlay boundary. So, yeah, identifying those sensitive areas would be part of that initial work.
All right. I guess if anybody has any more questions for Jeremy or Joanne, I'm gonna sort of propose that we set aside some time over our next 2 or 3 meetings to explore this further, the idea further, with some examples that you can give us, Jeremy. Does that seem like a reasonable approach that will help us frame, I guess, a recommendation if that's where we want to go?
Yep, and I actually found there's actually a website called formbasedcodes.org, and they have a really good guide for communities on form-based codes and a step-by-step guide. So I think this might help actually explain some stuff as well.
We don't need a grant. Not a website.
But it does walk through different methods, different types of form-based codes, kind of scoping a form-based code process, right? How it may intertwine with existing regulations, stuff like that. So I'll probably send this along with. I found Bozeman, let's see, Missoula and Billings have form-based codes, and I believe Bozeman now has form-based codes in there, so I can send those examples along as well. So you guys can take a look at what those communities in Montana have actually done.
Super.
And then Joanne gave us at the URA this introduction to form-based code. Was that came from you, didn't it? So I don't know. Did you give it to us electronically, or?
I think it was recommended by KSU, so they got a link for it.
So if I've got it electronically.
Probably Google it.
So if I got it electronically, I can forward it to everybody on the planning board. So maybe, I guess, the next 3 meetings, what's people's consensus are gonna be? Next 2 meetings, 3 meetings, or 4 meetings?
Well, I don't think that we should make it at the top of the meeting, but we should definitely have it under old business and see how we go.
Okay. Is that okay with everybody else? Get a yes from Chelsea.
I'll get a verbal yes if you would like it.
A yes from Sue.
And then,
Go ahead, Dave.
I have a question on if we add that to the next 2 or 3 meetings, because the other part I heard about this is where the recommendation was we finish our current planning and then we loop back around and look at this. If you're talking about putting any sort of, I'm looking at the time, we're an hour into this meeting now and haven't got to the planning zone. Is this something you want to do in the near future, or do you want to put it off a little bit and finish this and then do it? How does that fit into your overall big picture?
Well, I think maybe if we set aside, I mean, tonight, we probably went a little bit longer than what we needed to. But if we restrict it to the first half hour or so.
I don't have an opinion. I just know that part of that is we're working to get the zoning done. I think there's been enough things identified that we'd like to get that zoning done sooner rather than later. And so when you cut, the relatively few times that we get together down in half or even significantly, it's obviously going to extend that and double the time out it takes till we get the zoning. And that was just the observations / question.
Sure.
I personally think we should get it done sooner than later and not push it off till the end of zoning, specifically because I think it might impact how we do zoning, for one, and two, to kind of get that ball rolling. So once we can make that recommendation to council, then grants can start to be something that we're looking at and being a little bit more proactive, so that way when we're done with zoning, we can jump right in.
It was my understanding that for grants, we're talking about the beginning of next year anyway, so I don't see the rush in doing this before we finish the zoning. We can always go back within that URD, and if we decide to do form-based for that one area, then we could, no big deal. I'd like to get zoning done first. Let's get zoning done. And there doesn't seem to be any rush, simply because there's no grants that are going to be even available, or you can put your toe in until the end of the year.
But just one thing with the grant cycles is generally you want to be proactive in setting up the groundwork for those grants, so when that grant comes available, you can be putting in. And again, I think spending 30 minutes on this would be extremely beneficial to get it done.
Yeah.
And we'd still be able to work on zoning. It's not like we'd be jumping into doing this only and then going back to zoning. I think, again, even if we had to call a special meeting specific for this, I see the importance of that. And, it's one of those things that sometimes you got to put things, not necessarily on hold, but some things you have to work congruently. Same way if we had a conditional use or something along those lines come up. It's just, as I also want to see zoning done. I'm not trying to push it back by any means, but I do think that it's beneficial to get the ball rolling.
And don't we have a big design review, conditional use, or something for Landmark coming up?
Yeah, next meeting.
At the very next meeting. So that's going to be our priority at that meeting, for sure. So we're not going to get any zoning done at that meeting. So that's why I'm kind of saying we're into September. Summer's over, we have September, and one of the meetings in September is already gone. So I'm just pushing to get zoning complete.
Yeah, I agree with that, for sure. But I think my concern is that we wait till after zoning, we're probably, which would be hopefully sooner than later, but say by the first of the year, or the next 2 months or whatever. My concern is that we're just delaying. We're already, two things. One is, I think it might help us inform what sort of modifications we should be looking at for C3N North, because we've talked about those.
Yeah.
And it might be such that we think about or have a better understanding of what form-based code might help us with that decision. We probably, with the conditional use review for the next meeting, I guess I would say that the next time we visit this form-based code would be the meeting after that, because we would give us and if there's time to, at the end of that conditional use review, we just continue on with old business on reviewing our zoning, and then have the next meeting set aside a half hour to kind of review the information that Jeremy sends us, and I would hope that we all sort of take the time ahead of time to look at that information so we come prepared with sort of questions and spend about a half hour on those and then move back into zoning. That's kind of what I'm proposing, I guess, is or thinking about.
I'm not against that, as long as it's a half an hour, because we have a lot of work left to do.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Again, it doesn't have to be a, you know,
An
3
hour
meetings
and
worth
10
of
minutes
stuff. It doesn't have to be a
discussion.
full, you know, presentation. It can be brief and it can be to the point.
Does that sound reasonable, Jeremy, or are we kind of, you feel we're going to end up delaying our completion of our zoning review too much?
No, I mean, I think your plan is solid. I mean, hopefully the information I send you, which I will try to send out this week, so you guys have plenty of time to review. Hopefully that will answer your questions and clear any issues that you think you have with it up. And I mean, hopefully the idea would be that would give you plenty of time to review that, and then a half an hour hopefully is enough to recommend that to move forward with the city council. I mean, ultimately, this is, again, you're just recommending the city council look at this. It's ultimately up to the city council to determine whether they want to direct staff and planning board to do it. And so, you know, and then even then, it's just because that happens doesn't mean this happens, right? I mean, you could get into the process and just decide this isn't for us and end up not doing it, right? So I would say that this isn't, you know, if you just because you make a recommendation now means that you're locked into doing it, if that makes sense, right? You have other opportunities down the line to pull the plug, essentially, and say, no, we just don't feel like this is right. You know, you might get into community engagement, and maybe during community engagement, it's like, this is not going to work. And you might say, we just don't feel like this is going to work for us, right? And that's okay. If that's what you guys decide as a community, then that's okay, right?
Yeah, to me, it's a process. So, and part of that process is educating ourselves enough to understand what it means and then make the recommendation. Whether the city goes along with, council goes along with it or not is a decision point. If they decide to go ahead, then another decision point is how to proceed. So, but at least it gets, in my mind, it at least gets the process going rather than waiting 6 months to get the process going. I guess, so that's kind of where I'm.
And all we're really doing is recommending something, so.
Right, it's not a decision.
Yeah.
Does that seem reasonable to you, Joanne, what's been outlined?
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, so moving down on the agenda is back to old business, which is continue the review of our zoning regulations. And so I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.
All right, I think we were in RV parks. RV design standards. Section 14 is what I have highlighted as the start water, wastewater, utility services.
That's what I have.
Okay, is there anything before we start? Is there anything anybody wants to go back to the after last meeting and discuss anything that was decided on or reviewed previous?
The only thing that came up was, in my mind, was the comment made last week by Steve about how do we define temporary space, temporary occupancy, and I think that was one of your questions. And did we resolve that, or is that something we should come back to at some future date? Or
I mean, we didn't really resolve that, necessarily. I think the discussion really wrapped around how do you enforce? I mean, we say it's a temporary use, right? But how do if you put a time limit on it, I think the question was, how is that enforced, right? I mean, that takes a fair amount of uh, uh, resources from the city to potentially, try to enforce a time limit through code enforcement, right? So, how do you do that? I think it's easy to do when you're talking about, somebody living in an RV on a lot when they're not supposed to do it. You can collect that evidence that they're living in the RV, and you can say, hey, you can't live in an RV on a piece of property, right? But in an RV park where, a business is renting out a space for RVs, how do you enforce that, right? That's the question I have, and I don't know that I have a very good answer, other than, it's just going to take if an RV park comes into the city, that becomes an enforcement issue and code compliance. There could be considerable resources trying to comply with that if you try to do.
But Jeremy, if an RV park comes into the city, there's somebody who's going to be renting out the spaces and maintaining it. So they're the ones that are going to be enforcing a temporary rule. So just because the city hasn't got staff to enforce things doesn't mean that we don't pass the laws for those. So if we say that when we say temporary, there's a temporary permit, 1 month, whatever, then whoever's running the RV park, they know the rules. That's the deal. They're the ones enforcing it. If we find that they're not enforcing it at some point, because the way enforcement works in Red Lodge is somebody complains, and then it's enforced. So, come on, that's the truth. So
I mean, that's
that
most
you
small
don't pass
communities
a
will.
rule.
But I mean, yeah, again, it's totally up to you guys. If you want to put a time frame on it, I'm fine with that. For me, it comes down to an enforcement. I think we have the Section 9 has temporary occupancy and mobility, and it describes what that means. That means that occupancy of an RV space shall not establish the space as a permanent residential dwelling site. An occupied recreational vehicle shall remain readily movable and capable of being removed from the space without demolition or removal of permanent construction. Wheels or an approved jacking system shall remain functional, and utility connections shall be of an approved disconnectable type, right? So it can't be permanent piping like sewer piping to a sewer service. It has to be a flexible hose, disconnectable type of connection. Permanent foundations, permanent attached rooms, porches, decks, garages, storage buildings, and similar improvements that convert an RV into a permanent dwelling are prohibited. So if you start seeing these types of things happening, when you're, and with the city sees that, or if somebody complains and says, hey, somebody just skirted their RV, right? That's obviously they're not living there temporarily. These are enforceable by the city. So the city can send a violation letter to that business and say, hey, such and such RV space has a permanent RV.
I think that's appropriate, and I think that's probably the easiest way to create rules without trying to find enforcement. And again, I think that this is easy to see and easy to identify, and it's also pretty easy to say that this is a public health and safety concern as well, to where you can't have that permanent structure here because in case of a fire, that RV is not super fire rated. So you might need to get up and go. So that's.
I don't think that we need to define temporary. Let's just leave it at that, because I don't think we should define it.
Yeah, I think this is perfect.
I mean, the other thing, I mean, again, zoning is, you can always amend zoning later too. So if an RV park comes in and if an RV park gets approved, right? Big ifs, right? But if it happens and you guys happen to approve one and something down the road becomes an issue like this that you feel needs to be addressed, you can always revise the zoning to put in that time limit and work to enforce that, right? But I think for now, I think this clearly outlines what a temporary movable RV is meant to be. And if you start seeing any of, I mean, trust me, I see it all over Townsend and East Helena in RV parks that are outside the city limits where it's obvious people are living there permanently because they have the RV skirted and insulated underneath so it doesn't freeze, right? They have, some of them have porches or decks off the side of them that are built from the door. It's obvious that they're living there permanently. Um, you know what I'm saying? So I think if something occurs like that, it's going to be pretty obvious that somebody's living there permanently, and you'll be able to enforce that.
Go ahead, Dave.
Jeremy, you just said something that caused me heartburn, and I want to make sure I heard it correctly or go back and revisit it. But what I heard you say is we can do this and we can come back and change it later. And what I pictured in my mind is somebody coming in and building an RV park, and you know, they have a business plan or a model about how that works, and then we're going to suddenly come in and tell them this isn't an option or that doesn't work. And I don't know, we can change it after the work, and it just sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen. So what did you mean about we can come in and change it? Did I articulate my point, what my concern is?
I understand what you're saying, but I think that basically what you would be doing is you'd be clarifying what temporary means as far as the amount of time an RV can be in.
So you're just saying if you needed to clarify temporary, that's what
Correct.
you meant from there.
Correct. Yeah.
I don't-
more like adding a definition. It'd be more like adding a definition for temporary to the regulations, so then you could enforce a time frame easier.
One of my big concerns from a municipal standpoint is, and it's a little bit of my biggest concern with going back to the form-based thing is just, does it stifle development by scaring developers off from our city? That's something that we've seen and we've dealt with in the past. I like that we are getting to the point that developers are now willing to come to us and propose X, Y, and Z, and I think that's a huge, significant portion to addressing and solving some of our problems, be it housing, be it those other things, is municipality doesn't have the money to come in and solve these problems. So we have a dependency on those other organizations to come in and do it. And so just anytime I see something that's shifting the landscape underneath somebody, I don't think that serves us well. And that was just why that sentence kind of caught me off guard, is that, you know, I pictured somebody coming in and then us changing the rules underneath them. And I would very much like to dispel that perception of our city out there.
Well, and I personally think the way it's written right now, where we clearly define what movable mobile RV means, and you know, a temporary structure, I think those are physical things that we can see as a community, right? And if they start to occur, such as they're taking off the jacks and the wheels and putting in skirting, obviously that's not temporary anymore, right? Somebody's using that.
Concerns with that, like I said, I sat here very nicely and didn't say anything, and then you said we can come in and change it later, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. So I just,
well, I mean, I threw that out there because it's true. You could, right? Now, whether you want to or not, it's another story, but you could do it. But I think the way it's written right now makes it very clear that this is our intent, and this is what we're going to be looking for, right? And if you violate this, you're going to be in violation, and we can send you a violation notice, right? And then that business owner has to correct that. Basically, they have to tell that person, hey, you can't do that, you know, whatever. So
Thank
Well-
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can you wait till our public comment, or do you have?
That's all right.
He's gonna try to remember.
Huh?
He'll make a note.
Do we want input or question from the
Oh,
audience?
I don't mind either way. I'm all about community conversation, but I know that planning board acts a little differently than I do.
Well, I've always been for it
Yeah.
as well.
Do you have comments, Steve?
Steve?
Speak.
Speak, Steve,
I
speak.
just think it's an interesting concept to only make a regulation or a rule that's easily enforced. To me, that's not the way to run a municipality. If there's a reason to have a rule, if you want it to be temporary, we're only gonna judge temporary by something we can see driving by in a car. It's easy. But if there's something that we think is important, we don't want somebody to be there for 24 months. They can be there for 24 months, as long as they don't put a skirt under it.
So
I just think it's inconsistent.
I think for me, just to counter on this, and I know we've had a little bit of a conversation outside of this table, but specifically, again, going to it, does it matter if they're there for a week or if they're there for 24 months?
To me, no.
And that's exactly it. So my concern is the appearance and how it looks and how that reflects on the neighbors and how it impacts the neighbors. Someone who is necessarily staying there for an affordable cost of living, or because this is their retirement plan, because I know plenty that live in their camper. Like, that's just part of how some people are living now. And I personally don't want to live in a camper. I would go insane. But it works for some people, and as long as they're staying aesthetically pleasing, safe, and not impacting the neighbors negatively, I don't see a concern.
Then I would say strike temporary from any language, because it's not a concern.
Well, it's a temporary structure.
Yeah.
It's
You
a
still want to
temporary.
be able to leave in case of emergencies. That would be my concern, and again, otherwise you can just
Nothing
put an
attached.
RV and park it and anchor it and build around it, and that's where it starts to create problems.
Yeah.
But if you are
But-
using it in a temporary type of use, even if it is for 2 years at a time, it's more so that aesthetic and that impact on the neighbors.
The aesthetics.
Yeah, that's me. I mean, let me ask, so if you had someone that was living in your neighborhood next door in a camper on a lot, perfectly kind, human, doesn't bug you at all, but they start to build out on their trashy little trailer, would that bug you?
Are we calling that a temporary?
That's what I'm saying, is no, that wouldn't be
When does
temporary, it's expanding
That
out.
changes. It changes it when they start building onto it
Yeah.
with permanent structures.
The other thing, if I recall, because I had this problem last time, is this is specifically talking about a development RV park.
Correct.
Because I had the question last time about, does this mean I buy a lot in Red Lots and I park a mobile home on it and I'm good to go? So this is only to do with development RV parks.
A
as part of the
commercial
conversation as well.
RV park.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I think I brought us back to this just because of the comment last week, so I think right now, what we have defined, and the way Jeremy's explained it, kind of sets some limits, and I think also, based on the other point that Steve made last week, economics might come into play too. You know, $2,500 a month,
Gets old.
I would prefer being in a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom
Anything.
house than living in an RV. So I think that there's some other things that may
Ameliorate.
kind of help.
Like come winter.
And again, just to kind of play, again, from someone who knows people that do this, generally speaking, they're making very good money, but I think that's on the business to decide what they're charging for the space. Just because the KOA is charging a certain amount per night, that might not be reasonable, but for some of the other folks that are doing this, I have a buddy, again, a friend who's doing this, and he pays $800 a month for his site. But that is still more affordable than an apartment. It also gives him the flexibility that he's not tied up in a lease. He can literally pack up his home and go and take care of his grandmother, which is part of the reason he does this. So it's just, again, it's a consideration of a different style of living, and I think more so we should make it to where what we see and how it's affecting the people around it is appropriate, and not necessarily judging the people that are staying within the camper or deciding how that business model works for that individual.
Okay, to move along.
Okay, so we're down in the water, wastewater, and utility services section. I think we kind of ended here because we were discussing, because currently I have in there all RV sites shall be designed with water, sewer, and electrical service. But we had kind of ended with, do we want all RV sites to have water, sewer, and electric? I have it written that way, but there was some discussion last meeting on whether we wanted to do that. So if we don't necessarily want all of them, we could say if provided or so. I can play with the wording, but
I don't know if we should put that in there at all, frankly, because they may decide to save the money when they develop the RV site by having a central area for sewer, for dumping their trailers. And I know that I've stayed in both types, and it really makes it temporary, really temporary.
Yeah, real quick.
When you don't have water and sewer hookups. But it would save a developer quite a bit of money not to have to do all the individual sewer and water and power.
And I agree on that. I don't think we necessarily remove it. I think that we just can strike a few items from here. 'Cause again, you do want the stuff to be underground, like utility distribution lines should be underground.
If provided.
Yeah, if provided, like there should be some regulation on that. And again, making sure that they're making that notation for DEQ and Department of Public Health and Services is probably not a bad plan.
so what
And
I
I
did
think-
was I struck out
Yeah.
B. I struck out B. And I struck out D, and then I amended C to say if water and sewer electric hookups are provided, comma, hookups shall comply with applicable plumbing, electrical, utility, and public health requirements.
Perfect.
Perfect.
They completely struck out B, is that what you said?
Yeah, because that was like no non-hookup sites.
And B and D both. So D said no non-hookup sites are permitted. So we need to strike D as well. So basically just struck those two and then said if you are providing hookups, they need to comply with applicable plumbing, electrical, public health.
And out of curiosity, I'm not seeing it on the screen here. Do we have it required that the park has to provide wastewater services? Because I think that is important, that there has to be some, like, if they're not gonna have it at each piece, there should be some sort
A
of.
central.
Correct, because otherwise that town pump's gonna get real busy. So I do think that it should be required on site, but whether it's at each.
At a minimum.
At a minimum, yeah.
I agree with that, that at a minimum, there should be, the wastewater.
Yeah, or RV accommodation.
So we could say if we could say after the second one, we could say if individual sewer hookups are not provided, a central sewer dump station shall be provided on site.
Good.
Okay, yeah, we don't need, don't need that.
Okay, is that all for water, wastewater, and utilities? Think so.
Yep.
Okay. Next section, fire and life safety. Pretty standard, basically just saying fire apparatus access, hydrants, extinguishers, emergency access, fire lanes, propane, outdoor fires shall comply with adopted fire code and applicable state requirements. Propane cylinders and systems shall be approved for recreational vehicles or installation in which they are used. Bulk propane systems shall obtain all required permits. We kind of talked
What
about
does that mean?
we
Yeah,
kind of talked
that
about bulk propane last time, and I think what we kind of decided was we didn't want bulk propane on site, right?
Yeah, I think that that's not a good idea.
I'll just say
And then
bulk propane distribution is not permitted on site. And then space numbers and internal roadway identification shall be clearly visible for emergency response. Are we good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Landscaping, screening, and lighting. A landscaped perimeter, we talked about this a little bit last time too, but a landscape perimeter buffer not less than 10 feet in width around all perimeter boundaries except at approved driveways and pedestrian connections. So we had kind of talked about that last time. A landscape buffer shall include vegetation, a 10-foot opaque fence or wall or a combination thereof. I think we hashed this out last time.
We did.
Yep.
So I don't know that we need to go back through that unless you want to.
No, I don't think we're good.
Okay. Stormwater and snow storage, drainage and stormwater facilities shall comply with provisions of the zoning code. Basically, that's just saying we have a whole stormwater section in our standards of applicability. So just saying that stormwater has to comply with that. And then snow storage areas adequate for the anticipated operation of the park shall be identified on the approved plan. Snow storage shall not block RV spaces necessary to maintain approved capacity. Fire lanes, fire hydrants, parking, pedestrian routes, utilities, drainage, or site triangles. Any questions there?
No.
No.
Okay. Refuse and common storage, centralized refuse and recycling facilities shall be conveniently located, accessible to collection vehicles and screened as required by this chapter. Outdoor storage of boats, unoccupied recreational vehicle trailers, maintenance equipment, or other large items shall occur only in approved common storage areas and shall not occur within required setbacks, buffers, parking spaces, fire lanes, or recreation areas.
Well, first off, I don't think that, there's gonna be central recycling facilities.
We could say just
I
central.
don't think we should require it.
I'm sure if it's requiring it, but I see what you're saying. I don't have any issue with striking it.
I'll just say centralized refuse collection facilities.
And I don't understand outdoor storage of boats. I mean, these are RV spots, so.
Well, if you're camping and dragging.
Well, some people pull a boat behind their camper, and I've seen areas where they park their boat, and then they in one area of the RV park, and then they have their RV in their RV space. So I have seen
So
that.
they pay for both kind of thing?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yep.
And what's maintenance equipment?
Lawnmowers, things like
for
that,
the-
where they maintain, any maintenance things that they need to maintain the property.
The park. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm good, except for that recycling, so.
Okay, are we good to move on?
Yep,
Yep,
Okay, management and maintenance. The owner or operator shall maintain an emergency contact available to the city and emergency service providers. Internal streets, pads, utility facilities, common areas, landscaping, drainage, refuse areas, signs, and fire access routes shall be maintained in a safe and serviceable condition. An abandoned, burned, wrecked, or inoperable recreational vehicle shall be secured when necessary for public safety and removed from the park in accordance with the applicable nuisance and fire codes. Park operations shall not create a public nuisance through excessive noise, glare, smoke, dust, odor, refuse, wastewater discharge, or obstruction of public streets. And the number and type of occupied spaces may not exceed the number and type shown on the approved city and state plans and licenses.
yeah, that works.
I have a question about C. Why would we allow abandoned, burned, wrecked, or inoperable recreation vehicles?
Well, I think that's it's a management and maintenance item. So if, say an RV catches fire and it's on, it's on the site essentially. Basically, it's saying that needs to be essentially removed from the park in accordance with nuisance and fire code requirements. Not
Okay,
saying somebody would move in a burned or wrecked one into the RV park. It's more of if this occurs while the RV is on your site, it needs to be removed in accordance with nuisance and fire code requirements.
Yeah, I just saw the remove part of that sentence, so go ahead. Yeah, all right.
Okay. The last one is mixed manufactured home and RV developments. I was on the fence on whether or not I wanted to include this in here or not. There may be a situation where you have both, but I don't see that as a likely situation. But it basically says where a single property contains both manufactured home community and a recreational vehicle park, the boundaries of each use shall be clearly identified on the approved plan. Each portion of the property shall independently comply with the standards applicable to that use. Permanent residential manufactured home spaces shall not be converted to transient RV spaces or vice versa without approval and amended site plan and any required state approvals. And shared streets, utilities, recreation areas, service buildings, and other common facilities may be approved when they are designed to serve both uses safely and all applicable requirements are satisfied.
I don't mind having it in there.
Just cover it.
Yeah, I think it's fine to have it in there just in case somebody proposes something like that. Then at least you have something in there that clearly says, hey, these uses need to be reviewed separately by the planning board, and you need to meet those requirements of each one, right? Separately. So I think it's okay to keep it in there.
So what you're saying is they would have to go through the manufactured home process and the RV development process, right?
Yeah, I think essentially what I see occurring is basically you have two conditional use permit applications, one for the manufactured home park and one for the RV park, and you would review those as two separate applications.
Jeremy, do we have anything in here, saying, like a manufactured home is any mobile home after what, 1980?
Yes, yeah, we require that all manufactured homes meet HUD requirements, which is what you're talking about. Yep.
But we don't have to say that no mobile homes would be allowed.
I mean, essentially, that's what you're saying. If they meet HUD requirements, it's not a mobile home.
As a manufactured, correct,
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not
I
a
didn't
mobile.
know if we
If
have-
it meets current HUD requirements, it's not classified as a mobile home. It's a manufactured home.
Right.
And Montana statute is very clear on what's a manufactured home and what's a mobile home. And we outlined that in the manufactured home section, home community section, so. That gets us through RV parks.
All right, well, it's 7:15. So I think maybe we'll set it up to where we start on E next
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, and E, I think the rest of these will go fairly, I
Yes,
think
I-
some of these will go fairly quick after this now.
What'd
So
you say? What'd you say, Jeremy?
I think the rest of these sections should go relatively quick. Since they're not necessarily new sections like manufactured home parks and RV parks.
Right.
All right, so we'll start on E next meeting. Let's see. Written correspondence, staff communication and update.
Did we have any written correspondence?
The only thing I have is that landmark building will be at the next meeting for design review. And the only thing I will say is that I'm gonna be at a planning conference in Dillon that day, and I should be able to get on the meeting virtually, but I cannot foresee any technical difficulties. So in the event I can't, I mean, you guys will have the staff report, and you will be able to go through that process with my staff report. If for some reason I cannot get on the meeting.
It doesn't sound like something we want to do without our planner present.
No.
I will try my best. Like I said, I'm planning on being on, but I cannot foresee any technical difficulties. So.
In any event, Connor will be here, right?
I'll also be in Dillon at the conference.
Connor's
What's that?
Oh, in Dillon at the conference.
Oh, okay. Ooh. What would happen if, because that's set up as public review already, and we're already under some time constraints in terms of.
Yeah, I mean, we already have the notices out for that public hearing. So, I mean, you could always do the public hearing and then table any decision to the next meeting if you wanted to just take public comment, but I think it's going to be relatively straightforward. But like I said, I'm gonna test things out before the meeting, and if I run into any issues, I'm basically going to try to hotspot from my phone to get on my laptop so that I can participate. But like I said, I don't know if that's gonna. Hopefully, it's gonna work. But
All right.
Jeremy, from what I remember, looking at the itinerary for the conference, there's no time conflicts either, so.
What's that?
From what I remember looking at the itinerary, there's no time conflict, so I'll jump on as well.
Need to be a social something in the evening if there's something there.
yeah, there's just some social stuff, and I was just not planning on attending any of that stuff on Wednesday night. So. And Connor, I think you could be on as well to help with the agenda and stuff virtually. So Connor will be on virtually along with me. And if I run into any issues, I suppose I could always come to your hotel, Connor, and we could just do it together from your hotel room. But
Okay.
All right. Anything else?
I can't think of anything, Dave. I can't think of anything else that needs to be in front of you right now.
I take it Spires is back out again for them to be responding to the latest.
I sent comments several weeks ago back to them. They didn't address all of my first round of comments, so I sent them back another round of comments, which were essentially the some of the same comments I sent before, so they just didn't address all my comments, so just waiting for a response from them.
I know we've coordinated conversations with them in like Public Works and Great West and stuff, so hopefully. But to your point, that still exists out there.
And we are coordinating actively with MDT on any requirements for the intersection with the highway and any requirements that might be needed. So we had a meeting with MDT on that and any requirements that they might have, and how we're going to coordinate that with our process. So just so you know, we're actively coordinating that with MDT. So.
Well, that's intriguing, that the highway would be involved with fires.
Well, it is by virtue of the fact that if you have is it more than 100 homes, then you've got to have a turnoff lane?
Yeah, I mean,
Alpine.
they're impacting, their traffic impact study shows impacts to the highway intersection, so
Okay.
so MDT has to be involved with that discussion. But I don't want to get too far in the weeds because we don't have a sufficient application and I don't want any issues with with ex parte communication. So we'll stop there. I don't want to say any more.
Understood.
All right, public comment.
Hope Smith, 517 North Hauser. I'm a little confused when you're talking about possibly allowing manufactured homes in concurrence with RV parks, because those don't seem like they're temporary. And then how are you going to address water, sewer, hookups, things like that? So that part was real confusing to me. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the way I understood it, that if they were coming in as a manufactured home, we would follow the manufactured home guidelines for that.
For water, sewer.
For water.
Two parks,
Permanently anchored.
one parcel. Yeah, 2 parks, 1 parcel.
Okay.
Different rules.
On
completely
each
different
side.
Structure, they'd have to follow the rules for each of those different parcels.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Not mixed interviews.
How about online?
Angie's there.
Mr. Chairman, I see, I'll just reemphasize that there's a call for public comment. I see no mics, no hands, no cameras.
Okay. And I'll call the meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Steve and Hope. We appreciate you coming and
Thanks.
sitting through these.
Yeah.